Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Story Crucible. That's right. We are back. It's been a long time. I'm Eric.
It has.
I'm joined by Lila. Lila, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Welcome back to YouTube,
You?
no less.
YouTube.
I
Hi,
know,
YouTube.
right? Oh, wow. I need to make this little logo thing here bigger in the corner. I'll have to work on that later. Now is probably not the time to sit here and tweak all of the video settings because we have stuff to discuss.
We do.
It's
In a
been
timely fashion.
a while. Yes, for once, right? Because so far it's not really been timely with
No,
the releases of the episodes, but that's okay.
plus we
It's
also make them
2020.
way too long. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're
there's
going to have
that.
shorter episodes now because, YouTube, and they don't like an hour and a half long episodes of things on YouTube.
Or like we'll go an hour and a half and then you have to edit this out. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll edit out all the good parts. I promise.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
So how have you been? What have you been up to? What have you been watching?
You know, stuff.
Stuff.
been
2020,
2020. It's been a rough year
Yeah.
so far. And yeah, what have I been watching? I've mainly been watching things that take your mind off the stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, right. Escapism.
Yes, I've been somewhat drawn to, historical stuff. And
Ugh.
what? No, I can't help it. It's just like you go to a place that isn't a pandemic right now,
Yeah.
or like a crazy place with
Yeah,
elections.
look back through history and go back to things like the Black Plague and
There aren't that many movies about that. I
well,
didn't
that's
go
true.
like Les Miserables. I just went silly things.
Okay. I can't even pronounce that. I look at it and I always say, oh, the Les Miserables.
It's pretty good.
It's typical American,
I'm not actually sure I did it right, to be honest.
Oh, you did a heck of a better job than I would have. By the way, for those who don't know, maybe you're new to the show, you're just discovering this through YouTube. Lila is our Berlin correspondent.
Yeah.
Yes. We try to diversify as much as we can on the Random Chatter Network. It's taken some time, but we are very, very happy and fortunate and lucky to have Lila with us on the network.
Yeah, international edition.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And she's an author and an editor and
Yes.
knows a lot more about that sort of thing than I do. I just pretend that I know stuff. She actually does. So that helps.
But yeah, I think that's why we never keep it to half an hour, because we then go way too deep into everything. But we'll see how it goes today.
But so the point of the show, again, for the newcomers here, the point of the show is to kind of go deep, right? It's to talk about the element of story in movies and television and sometimes books. And sometimes we will be comparing books and movies and television as well. But, people talk about the directors and the cinematography and the actors. But there's a certain, everybody's interested in story, but like, what is story? What is the journey of the characters and the themes that are there and what is the message that's trying to be conveyed? If there even is a message, there's some movies that are just what Lou likes to call a popcorn flick. It's just an adrenaline ride, right? But then I think there's also a difference between story and plot.
There is.
And I think this is going to be kind of a brief episode because we wanted to cover this a while back. We're talking about the Umbrella Academy.
Yes.
And we were going to cover season 1, and then season 2 came out. We decided to do that. And then we decided season 2 wasn't maybe as strong as we thought. And then I finally got Lila watching The Boys on
true.
Amazon Video. And now Umbrella Academy is, yeah.
We've decided that we're going to compare them because I think
Yes.
there's a lot of similarity there.
There
Obviously, they're both sort of a deconstruction of the sort of superhero trope.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they're really the first. I haven't really watched much of The Punisher, but I think that's already pretty much a deconstruction of the trope, right?
Yeah, I mean, The Punisher is really less about superhero-y stuff, though. And like, he's
That's
a
true.
comic book character, but he's not a superhero. And
That's
so it's
true.
more about war veteran, PTSD sort of thing. So it's a little less superhero-y. But this is definitely, the Umbrella Academy and The Boys are looks at traditional comic book type superheroes, but then in a very, very, very non-traditional way, and very much more modern type of storytelling and type of themes and stuff. And we're going to come back to that, but I do want to ask you, because I think you are a good person to ask this question of, what is the difference, at least in your interpretation, between story and plot? Or is there a difference?
I mean, obviously it always depends. I think there are moments when you can use it interchangeably, but I'm going to go for our purposes. I think that a plot is one element of the story, and story can also be. I think the story is the overall idea. The story is the character arc, the world building, the sense that you get when you watch it or read it, what it's about. I think the story is, for me, is kind of everything, because that's sort of what we're going to do in this story, Crucible.
Right.
And the plot is, quote unquote, just what happens.
Okay. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's like the points that the story passes through, from like the beginning to the climax to the ending, and the different plot tropes that it usually has, and then, where they go, what they do, how they solve the mystery.
Right.
And
I think
what parts those are.
Yeah, plot is very much how.
Yeah.
Whereas story is what. Yeah. So I think it's similar to the difference between strategy and tactics. Tactics, that's what you do when there's something to do, and strategy is what you do when there's not something to do.
Yeah.
So story is the overall, the themes, what happens to the characters, the consequences involved for things, the effects of what happens in the plot, whereas the plot is basically the sequence of events.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, a story can have several plots. Like, I think especially in the Umbrella Academy, you have different plots in it. You have there's this time traveling plot, and there's just the internal plot of the characters who are dysfunctional and need to figure out their lives, and they are kind of pretty disjointed, actually. So they're not actually. So you can have different plots in one work of fiction
and still have it be one overall story, because it all ties together. Okay. That's a good way of putting it. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
See, there's a reason we keep you around.
Well, sometimes.
To make me look better, because I need all the help I can get. So, all right. So let's talk the Umbrella Academy a little bit. So this is based on a comic book series. I'm guessing you haven't read the comics.
You've guessed right.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a comic person.
Well, that's okay.
I do have one.
You do have. So what one do you have?
I don't know if you know it. It's like it's a European thing.
Okay, I know some European ones, not many.
I think it's a French comic that's called Yoko Tsuno, and it's about this Japanese engineer who lives in France and solves ridiculous stuff like alien invasions and underground alien cities, and flies to other planets. It's pretty weird.
So anyway, the Umbrella Academy. Yeah, I've not heard of that one.
Yeah, see, it's a European thing.
The only French comic I'm aware of, which I haven't read, is
Asterix.
The one upon which the TV show Jeremiah was based, a show that was on Showtime a long time ago. I'd like you to watch that.
You know another French comic. You know Asterix and Obelix, right?
Oh, okay. I've never read it, but yeah, I know of it. It's
seriously, this is the thing that every kid in Germany reads: Asterix and Obelix comics. Yeah.
Well, when I lived in Germany as a kid, I saw it everywhere, but I never actually. I didn't get into comics as a kid. It wasn't until I hit college that I had some friends that were into the traditional Marvel stuff, and I started reading that. So
yeah,
I didn't really do the whole comic book thing as a kid. So by the time I was into comics, Asterisk and was it Obelisk?
Obelix. Obelisk is the thing that the stone. Anyway.
Okay, and this is different. Okay. Yeah, I that was like below me at that point, age-wise.
Yeah, that's what happened with me with Marvel. It's like, I think it's a bit not for children, and by the time I wasn't a child, I was reading, actual books.
Real things. Yeah, thanks for making all of our audience into comics feel good there, Lila. That's okay. It's okay. So the Umbrella Academy was based on a comic book series, and after watching the first season, I went and picked up the graphic novel collection of what I guess was supposed to have been the first season of the comics. And because everybody said, oh, it's so good and it's won awards and all this. I hated it. The comic book was, in my opinion, was horrible. Like maybe it gets better afterwards, but the collection in the first volume, like I just didn't get it. The characters were so different. Like Vanya, played in the TV show by Ellen Page. Way different and very like just intentionally malicious and almost demonic and like just I didn't get it. I didn't get it at all. But so as far as comparing and contrasting the comic book, I think we might not get into that so much in this episode. And when we come back in future episodes to The Boys, I might try to pick up the comic book for that too. Because I'm sure there's a collection I can get on like Amazon or something and watch it on my iPad, read it on my iPad, watch the comic books, read the comic book on my iPad. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But so, wow, the story in this one is kind of all over the place, right? So it's, or at least the plot is, again, I guess we have to make that differentiation. It's about a bunch of kids who were born at a certain time who had weird things kind of happen. And this older guy who goes around and collects all of them and starts this almost like an orphanage. Kind of if you think like in the X-Men, Professor X bringing these kids into this school, except he actually gets them from infancy. Yeah, buys them.
He buys them. Like
purchases them, which I think is illegal in a lot of states here in the US. I don't know about Europe, but.
However, I mean, you could make the argument that a person, a living being that is conceived without, with immaculate conception and it comes into your belly within like 5 seconds. Is that still a human being? I don't know.
Well, I think they would think so.
They would think
but
so.
That's another thing too, right? Yeah. So these were like conceived without actual traditional conception, and they did like gestate really quickly, right?
Yeah, and then
like in a day or two or something.
Like in a scene, it was like the girl jumped into the swimming pool and she wasn't pregnant, and then within 5 seconds she's like fully gestated.
See, there's a reason you don't go to swimming pools during a pandemic.
Yes.
Just saying.
In Russia.
So in Russia, yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, these were located all over the world. So he collects them and brings them into what he calls the Umbrella Academy and raises them. And each one of them has some sort of a superhero-like power, except one of them, Vanya, again, played by Ellen Page, who's really the only recognizable person in the cast here that I can see. I mean, it's a big cast. Well,
I think Robert Sheehan is kind of well known, but I think that's kind of the problem with him. I don't know if you've watched. Have you watched Misfits?
Klaus.
Yeah, Klaus.
I've seen. It's a British show, right?
Yeah, it's a British show that's kind of similar. It's like a group of young.
I've seen some of it. Was he in that?
Yeah, he was in that, and he plays basically the same character. So which I found a little bit disturbing.
I'm gonna have to go back and where is I think Hulu has it. Here in the States.
I really liked it. It's sort of in my younger 20s. It was a really fun show to watch.
Yeah, it's an older show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I watched, I think, most of the first season. I always meant to go back to it, but I never did. I don't know how many seasons it lasted for, but.
It's also kind of similar to this because it's also another deconstruction of superheroes. It's a group of delinquents who are there in a facility where they have to do public service for some crime or misdemeanor they did, and then they get struck by lightning and then they have superpowers. And
I'm going to go back and watch that. Yeah, so I didn't realize he was in that. So he's another one. And then Mary J. Blige, a lot of people will know as a musician, a very good musician. And she plays one of the time cops, right?
Yes. Yes,
time assassins, time cops. Depending on what perspective you take on that agency that runs those.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure if I would call them cops, but yeah.
True. Yeah.
I think they call themselves assassins.
Assassin. Well, operative. I mean, the point is an agent. Yeah. It's not just to assassinate people. It's more to just kind of control the time stream and such, which sometimes involves assassination. But so do you want to try to explain the general premise of season 1? Because I don't know that I want to, because it's hard.
It is really hard.
It's really hard.
But I can try. But
Okay.
I might not do it super nicely because I feel like it's a bit too disjointed to really work, honestly.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But let's try. I think what I really like about the concept is the idea of taking, these childhood prodigies in different like areas and magical areas almost, or superhero areas. And then see how they are doing 15 years later with their lives. Like, how has that affected them? And what does it mean? I think it's also kind of, it transports you to a certain idea of, childhood actors, and what does it do to you if you are put in this position, in this limelight, and be obviously raised with a really difficult father figure.
Yeah. So I made the
also,
Professor X connection earlier. This is not at all like Professor X. I mean, this guy's like a real jerk.
Exactly.
Like,
and
just
also
horrible.
they have really difficult powers. Like, one of them is to see the dead, right? It's sort of, they're kind of more traumatizing powers than you might think in some ways. So I think for me, the biggest concept is to take these sort of messed up young people, or still somewhat young people, and see how they're doing with their lives. And
now we skipped over something here.
Figure that out. Yes.
When they were younger, when they were early teens, I guess, they were popular. Like, they were a superhero group that was making front pages in the newspapers and such.
Exactly.
Right? And so now we're fast forwarding and we're seeing them in their mid to late 20s.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Mid to late 20s.
Where they're not really out in the limelight anymore.
No. And one of them is Allison is an actress, but
True.
Diego is kind of doing the superhero trope thing where he's hanging out on police scanners and trying to get some fame or glory.
Yeah, doing the Batman thing.
Yeah. One was stuck on the moon because he was turned into a half gorilla. It's a thing. It's difficult to explain if you haven't watched it. But let's just go with the assumption that you have sort of watched it, or know at least what it's sort of about. And then
it'd be easier if you watch the trailer. Then some of the things we're saying will make sense, because otherwise you guys are just like,
it's like a
half
gorilla
dude on the moon, and what now? Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is also my issue with this. But I think it has two parts. It has this part where you look at the characters and see how does something that is a popular trope would affect them. And I think we've seen that in different shows also. And I like that part. I like sort of how dysfunctional they are and how it's really hard to deal with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then there comes the plot side of it, which is the time traveling assassins. So one of them, whose name is Number 5, because they have a horrible father.
Yeah.
Yep. And he disappeared when they were kids, maybe like 12, maybe. He looks
kind of
12,
at the height of their popularity. Yeah, one of them disappeared.
He could always relocate in space, but he then wanted to try time travel. His horrible father said, no, don't. And then obviously he did. And then he couldn't return and he couldn't find his way back. And so he, as an old man, he has joined the time stream agency as an assassin. And he comes back to save the world because he knows that the world will end in 8 days. And the time stream people are totally fine with this. They want it to stay that way. And he would like to save his family.
But when he comes back, even though he's like, in his 50s now or something?
Yeah. He
comes back in the body of his old self. So everybody, like I said, is in their late 20s, and he is 13, 12, 13. Yeah. Like, which I have to say, the actor
he's really good
that plays this kid, and I think the actor's 20-ish.
Probably, yeah.
Just brilliant. Like he looks like a 13-year-old who is really an old man.
Yeah.
Like, he nails it. It is almost worth watching the show just for this guy. I mean, he's my favorite character in the show.
Yeah, he's the best.
He's kind of a jerk, but then he's also genuinely trying to save people.
He's also
he
the
actually
only
cares,
one
but he's utterly a jerk.
He's also the only one who has any real skill, and I think that's important.
Right, that's
in
the
character.
other thing. Everybody else is incompetent.
Yeah.
Even if they're good at using their skill, they're just not good at figuring things out and knowing how best to do things. And he actually is a good tactician to the most extent, even better at strategy. And like, he gets everything that's going on. Like, he's smart.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that helps.
Right.
So he's really good. So then he comes back and they sort of have to figure out both, have to figure out seeing each other again after a really long time and dealing with their past and their present, but also having to save the world and while also defending themselves against time traveling assassins who keep trying to kill them.
Right.
That's the show.
So I think one of the things that does work about the show is the dysfunctional family thing. Like, it's believable. They care about each other, but they can't stand each other at the same time for the most part. And there are some lingering traumas from when they were younger. One of the characters actually has died, but because Klaus can talk to the dead, like, they have kind of a love-hate relationship going on. There's a lot to kind of unpack in the family structure there. And I think a lot of the show really is focused more so on that than a lot of the actual plot, which is odd because the plot is very complicated. It moves along. And I think it's okay. Like, when you watched it the first time, you enjoyed it, right?
Yes, I did.
And I did too. I think it's worth watching. I think we would both recommend it to people. Yeah. It can just be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I think it also loses something with rewatching it. It's sort of fun the first or second time because it's so crazy. Like, there's a gorilla on the moon. You know, it's sort of something different,
right?
And it's exciting to have something that,
which is, by the way, is not a focus of it. It's just kind of an odd thing, and it's a brief moment because he comes back from the moon.
Yeah, it's all the different weird powers. Like, Diego can. His power is he can throw things, mostly knives, but like he can throw things and hit anything he wants, like around corners, which weird power.
Bullseye from Marvel Comics. If you kind of think like a combination of like Bullseye and a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of Batman thrown in.
Cool. And I can't do that.
I know that you don't. I can translate for the people at home.
I could do it a little bit in The Boys because they're,
they're identical to the famous Justice League. Yeah, exactly. You've got the Superman analog. You've got the Wonder Woman analog.
Aquaman, dude.
Aquaman, yeah. That's easier.
But yeah, it's easy. So anyway, and then Allison has this weird power where she can say, I heard a rumor, and then whatever she says becomes true.
Yeah, I heard a rumor you walked off the top of a building, and then the person goes and walks off the top of the building.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
And that's like a pretty horrible thing. I mean, not just walking off the building, but she struggled with this because it's hard on relationships, obviously. And then what else? We already said Allison, and 5 he can locate in time and space.
I mean, it's mainly teleporting for him, but then he kind of accidentally trips across the fact that he can teleport through time as well. He can't do it well, though, because it's like it's a whole complicated it's like the equivalent of trying to do brain surgery just because you can otherwise take scissors and cut a piece of paper. Not the same thing as brain surgery. So it's that level of difficulty above teleporting. You've got the brother who died, who I guess can turn into some big, huge tentacle monster-y thing.
Yeah, he's creepy, but you never really see it in the first season.
You see it the one time during the flashback when they were kids, and I think that's where he dies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that. Gorilla Boy is basically your typical strongman.
Yeah, he doesn't really have anything that interesting.
Yeah, and then there's Vanya.
Yeah.
Who there's a lot of foreshadowing throughout the first season that maybe she does actually have powers and the father was just trying to suppress them. And it's not that hard to figure out that that's actually what was happening. So it's not a big spoiler to find that out. So don't worry. But in fact, I think the trailer kind of demonstrates that at some point a little bit. So not a big spoiler. I mean, we won't get too much into Vanya's character, but that is kind of one of the big plot points too, is what's going on with Vanya.
And what causes this end of the world that we have to stop.
Right.
And how does all that fit together?
Right.
And it's a good show. It's a fun show. I really enjoyed watching it.
So
I think.
Go ahead.
No, I think one of the things that it suffers on in terms of plot is that the internal conflict between the characters and the external conflict between the end of the world and the time traveling agents, I don't feel they're they connected enough. Like, I think a really good story has those connecting better, like that the internal conflicts drive the external conflicts, and that they
Right.
together create a good story arc. And that doesn't really happen here. And that's okay. I mean, especially because it's a series, and one season isn't the whole thing, so we don't know where the story arcs will go.
Right.
But that makes it not as satisfying to watch, I'm going to say, because there is that satisfaction of seeing something that meshes together really well and a character arc that is completed, and you don't really have that. So I would say that is one little thing that I didn't like about it.
I think that this is an interesting show to talk about after having mentioned, it's funny because when we were talking about bringing the show back again, I had brought up the fact that at some point we should talk about the difference between story and plot. And then separately from that, we decided to cover this as our first episode. And so I think it's kind of a good symmetry that we mentioned story versus plot in this episode with this show, because I think that the story and the plot don't really mesh that well in this series, but despite that, the first season is still good. But what makes it good, like you said, it's the discovery. And that's why I think it doesn't hold up that well on a repeat viewing. It's because the journey of discovery through the show is really good for the audience member. Like you said, as you're learning about the powers, not just what the powers are, because I mean, we listed them. That's easy to do. But the kind of demonstrating how the characters utilize the powers throughout the season. And then separately,
and also, what that means for them, like how traumatizing it really is to have powers,
right.
Because you suddenly realize that Allison, for example, with her rumor thing, she has a daughter, and she now isn't allowed to see her because she used rumor on her to keep her a little bit less tantrumy. And you suddenly realize that it's really hard if you have such a power and then not to use it when it's convenient to use it. But when you then use it, you control people.
And that's what's really brilliant about this show is the presentation of what it means to have those powers and what kind of consequences. Like you said, they're almost traumatic in a lot of ways. And it's something you don't often get to see in superhero content. So that was really interesting. And I think there are elements of the plot that are really interesting too, but they are complicated and sometimes confusing. So really, that's more kind of the roller coaster ride through the first season. So while I think the story for the first season has moments that are good, and the plot has moments that are good, they don't mesh well, but the season is still good to watch. But let's go into season 2 a little bit, because I think this is where things kind of fall apart. And we're already at about 30 minutes in the episodes. I don't think we're going to get too much into season 2, but I think this is a situation where, so the short version is they all get knocked backward in time and they get separated, and it's still basically the same general time period that they're knocked back to. But they each have different story arcs through the season. And it's not until later in the season where they all kind of reconnect and solve the big mystery and get to move forward. But each one of those plots, in my opinion, were tropes. They were just cheap, overused, recycled plots that we've seen over and over again in so many different things. And then the overall story was weak. Because each of those plots were just pathetic.
Yeah, they sort of all drop in each at a year's distance in like the 60s or 50s or 40s.
No, I think like early 60s.
I forgot now.
I don't know.
But at some point in the past. And so they're not together. And because they each drop in at a different year, they all are pretty much alone and set to themselves. And one becomes sort of a guru, Klaus, of course, and and Allison gets very much involved in the civil liberties movement, right? That's what and Alice and Vanya has a story where she falls in love with a woman who is with a abusive husband,
and she and special needs son, and Vanya has amnesia too. It's interesting because Vanya was very underused in the first season because she didn't have powers. In the second season, I feel like she didn't really shine because she had amnesia. Like you've got this like Academy Award level actress, the only known actress or actor in the entire series, and she feels so underused. Yeah.
And her character is so boring. Like I actually think in the first season it's almost worse. It's so hard to watch her because
I feel like she's worse in the second one. Like in the second, I couldn't stand any of those scenes, and it wasn't because it was a problem with the content, like the theme of the content. It was the fact that the writing of it was just so overused as things we've seen over and over again, and her character had very little agency at all, I felt like.
She never really does. It's, I don't know. I think they're all really scared of having her be this powerful, and then they keep like, in the first season, I think she's too shy. Like she's shy and like closed off to a degree that doesn't feel realistic for a grown up holding down a job. Like, you know what I mean? It feels
True.
too much, and so it's sometimes a bit hard to watch. And then in the second season, at least I thought the story with this sort of you know, women falling in love in a difficult time, in a difficult situation, is at least they had chemistry. She didn't have any chemistry
Yeah.
with the guy in the first season,
No.
but I think it's like they brought in all these disparate stories that are really interesting and important stories if they're given the time and the weight that they deserve. But
Yeah, and
they
they
were
didn't
just
feel that
thrown
way.
in. Yeah,
Yeah.
like here's a story about Klaus still mourning. It's trying to save his boyfriend from going to war, but he's a young man in that time, and so he can't admit that, and his father beats him and whatever, wants him to be a man.
Mhm.
Good, interesting story, but really not for a throwaway in a couple of scenes.
Right.
Same with
Nothing was done with it. And likewise, the civil rights story
rights.
with Allison, that
So
was probably the strongest of any of them. But yeah, it's something that we've seen done over and over again. And this didn't bring anything new or interesting to it. It felt very shallow. Like I'm watching something like Lovecraft Country right now, where there's a lot of that thrown in. And Lovecraft Country is like a whole different level of like strangeness and weirdness going on there. But if you take out the Lovecraft elements of it and just focus on the civil rights moments of it, those feel really meaningful and moving and like, wow, like, you know, putting yourself in that position and like, to me, that had meaning. To this, it felt like, oh, it's another television writer trying
wanting
to
to
write
say
what
something
he's
important.
seen 30 other times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just didn't.
It felt a little bit too, let's be woke in this season. And it's like, no, you have to actually put work into this to make it meaningful. And
Right.
that annoyed me in principle, but just from a story perspective, I thought it was a real big mistake, because in the first season, you had this sense that all that they're going through sort of leads them up to being siblings again, you know, to have
Right.
them, because you had all these in the first season, they sort of have to figure out how to live together or how to interact with each other, and they have a really hard time, and they don't really talk to each other. And
Right.
it's actually not a trope I like very much, that a lot of the plot depends on people not talking to each other, but they're finally getting there. They're finally getting to a point where they're talking. And then immediately in the next season, they completely throw them apart and give each of them a different story.
Right. Like
When the
in the first
interesting
season,
thing,
one of the points, the purposes of it was the bringing together of the family again and reestablishing the family and them learning to kind of work as a team. And then the first thing they do in season 2 is they split the team apart.
Yeah.
And they never really come back together fully as a team. Like some of them kind of find their ways to one another mid-season, but it's almost like when those characters have run out of other things to do.
Yeah.
And the writers just didn't know what else to do with them. And then at the end of the season, they kind of come together as a team, but they're still not really, like there's a little bit of teamwork, but you don't really ever get that the team, like, oh, they worked so hard to come together in season 1. You want to see how they work together in season 2, because that's a whole nother level of dynamic where they're kind of, maybe they're getting in each other's way a little bit, or, you know, maybe they need a break from one another. So, you know, there's got to be some kind of consequence to that now too. But instead, no, we're going to do 27 different plots. And
you give them all these new characters that you're not going to keep for the next season, because they stay in the past. So you have to get to know all these characters that you already kind of know won't really matter, and they're not really fleshed out properly. And really what you want to see is the siblings, because that's what the whole first season leads up to. It leads up to them becoming a little bit healthier
Right.
and sort of learning how to be siblings and to care for each other. And then you have this, and it was really disappointing for me. Like, it was really not what I wanted. And sure, you can argue that that would be fan service, or you can just argue that that's how story work. You can't just throw in new characters that nobody cares about and then leave them out again, and then it's like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
I did not like that.
There
I
was
thought it was a really
some,
bad decision for an ensemble cast to then go give each of them
yeah,
completely their own story, which is, you can do that when their ensemble story is kind of over, when they have completed that arc and you have nothing else to do.
right. And it
But I
did
thought it
grow
was
some of them a little bit,
yeah.
and that's okay, but it just didn't. Now, the antagonist story, I think, was a little bit better in season 2 than it was in season 1.
You mean because it made sense? Sorry.
I guess, yeah. I mean, that's
God,
really all it would take to make it better, huh?
Yeah. I really hate the antagonist story in season 1. I
Yeah, I
feel like
agree with you.
like the whole thing about, because there is a story about the end of the world, which has nothing to do with the time traveling assassins, because they just want to not stop it, basically.
Yeah,
And then you have the time traveling assassins and the agency, and that is never explained, and it doesn't have any actual impact on the ending.
right.
Like, I hope that's not a spoiler, but they do not impact the ending in any way, really. They just sort of, make for action scenes and shootouts throughout that make it more difficult to figure the ending out.
Right.
But they don't have any real impact on the story.
And that is something
so
that they did better
bugs
in
me.
season 2
Yeah.
is they actually gave a little bit more context for what's going on with the antagonists. And that, I think, that storyline was furthered a little bit. Like, that actually got somewhere. And I think that whatever of that bleeds into season 3 will be useful.
Yeah.
Like, that won't necessarily get left behind. There'll be some useful tie-in as we go forward. And I think that the teasing for season 3 at the end of season 2 could be interesting. What are your thoughts on that? You think that it'll
Definitely.
maybe help
Better
redeem
than
the show a
season
little
2.
bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might be better the third time, but I was really disappointed. I felt like you build something up in season 1 and then you completely smash it apart in season 2,
Yeah.
just to do the same thing all over again, just a bit
Differently.
It wasn't, because it was, again, like that Vanya, everybody already knew that Vanya had powers except for Vanya. So it's really the same story, the story of Vanya discovering that she has powers in the first season, and then
Right.
the second season again that Vanya discovers that
Discovering
she has powers.
Yeah.
Woo!
It's and even a lot of the other character struggles were the same struggle.
Yeah, it's really same struggle. Allison, same struggle. She starts a relationship, uses her power,
and
messes
Klaus,
her relationship up
to the same extent too. It was basically the same struggle. So that's a really good point. Now, I think in season 3, the way they have it set up is such that we might actually get to see the family working as a team. Yeah, which is kind of what we had expected to have all along, even in season 1. So maybe that'll be good. I hope.
I think so.
So real quickly, and let's transition over to the boys, and then we'll wrap up the episode here. How far into the boys are you right now?
Third episode.
Third episode of season 1.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I think the thing that distinguishes them the most is that I think, like, the boys. I hate the title, by the way. I think
I
the
do
Umbrella
too.
Academy. It's such a stupid title. It doesn't say anything. It's keep forgetting that that's the title. But
Yeah.
I feel like it takes the similar concepts about the idea of what would it actually mean if somebody has superpowers and what would they actually be like in real life, but makes them worse. Like, not just things dysfunctional and stupid, but somewhat evil, or at least sort of really selfish. But I think that's more realistic for the idea that someone has superhuman powers.
Sadly.
To be more, to abuse them rather than to just abuse themselves, which is more what the Umbrella Academy does. And then they take that and to a whole society level. Like, I feel like their world building is really on point, really good, because they take this idea of what would a world be like, the whole society, if everybody knew superheroes were real. And that is something that the Umbrella Academy just doesn't do at all. Like, at all. They're just saying, we had this team of young kids. They were really famous. Everybody knew they had superpowers, and now nobody cares. And nobody cares that there were lots of other kids that were born that way with powers and what happened to them. Like, the world just doesn't care that they're superhumans and what that means and what that could mean for military, or you know what I mean. It's just all those
Yeah.
tropes that just completely not used at all,
I mean, it is
which is
two different
fine.
environments for the heroes too. Like in Umbrella Academy, they're raised together
Mhm.
by a very strict disciplinarian of a father in isolation. So there's a certain level of, I mean, he's basically raised them to have codependency
Yeah,
to some extent. So there's a brokenness to them. Whereas with the boys, the superheroes were raised independently as very public idols
yeah,
and were worshipped on social media and become rich with, marketing deals and stuff like that. So it's not surprising that they turn out the way they do. Whereas in the Umbrella Academy, they're so sheltered that it's not surprising they turn out that way there. Though the
yeah,
world building is very different. There are some plot holes with the world building in the Umbrella Academy, as you said. Like, what does the world think of this? Even if they didn't know there were other superheroes beyond just these, like, why aren't they banging down the door for
yeah.
interviews and whatever else? Like, that's not
Or
how our
why?
world would be.
Yeah, and why are they letting like Allison, who has this really creepy power, just be an actress and nobody cares that she has a really creepy superpower? And
Right.
that might be the reason why she has her job. Like there would be
And
so
who would
many
want to work
conspiracy
with her?
theories.
Like, if I were an actor, I wouldn't
Yeah,
want to work with someone who could mind control me.
right? Exactly.
No.
And you never know if they did. So none of that is sort of taken into account. But I will
Right.
say, I think that's actually okay. Like I think that it doesn't have to go as far as the boys in terms of world building, because
Yeah,
you
I
can
agree.
you can have a more minimalist thing, because if you take everything to a really realistic thing, there are certain stories that you just can't tell,
Right.
and it would get too complicated. It's already way too complicated. Now, personally, I prefer the idea of what would society do with that and what problems would that bring, rather than this weird time travel agency thing, which I thought is a bit tropey and dumb. Sorry, I
Yeah.
just didn't like that plot at all.
The
I feel like,
sociological points brought up in The Boys, I think, are more interesting.
yeah, yeah. And I kind of wish the Umbrella Academy had gone with a slightly more traditional plot for the superheroes, like that they didn't have to solve like the end of the world immediately.
Yeah, they
And
got
we
like
could,
really epic really fast.
yeah, and stupid epic, like with all the shootouts. And I wish they'd had like more regular jobs to do, or more regular mystery to solve, and then build up
Right.
to like saving the world in the second or third or fourth season. Not necessarily, yeah, partly because it's too epic too fast, and then what do you do after that? You
That's the
save the world
problem.
again.
That's the
But
problem.
also because I really think their internal conflicts are the really interesting thing, and the time
Yeah.
travel agency is just a silly trope that gets in the way, that's never really explained. And I think that's sort of part of the thing that makes the boys feel so compelling, that the whole story and the atmosphere and the voice, it has one sort of theme. It's gritty and it feels realistic and hard and painful, but you get the sense that this could be real if superheroes were real.
Right.
But with the Umbrella Academy, it can never really decide. Like it has these really gritty moments that are
Hmm.
deeply emotional because they are such messed up people, and it's really sad and problematic. But on the other hand, it has this ridiculous levity sometimes, and then these sort of really tropey superhero things like the time agency, that's not really as deeply explained as the psychology of the characters. And so I feel there's a certain dissonance, and the dissonance is actually fun to watch the first couple of times, but then you get kind of tired of it, I have to admit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, would you recommend people watch The Umbrella Academy? And you said some
Sure.
good things. You said a lot of really kind of bad things about it. Like, is it still a recommendation?
It is. The unfair thing
Okay.
is that I really liked it much better before I watched The Boys. Um,
Yeah, that's the hard part.
it's difficult to do that, but I really enjoyed it the first time around. I think it's a fun show.
Hmm.
I don't think it's the best show ever, but it's
No.
it's one that's, that can be diverting. Personally, I think it could have done with a lot of rewriting, and especially with some actual moments that are enjoyable. I find that something that I'm looking for in series more and more, that when they have tension and they have rough, interesting, and dark and gritty still think you need moments that are enjoyable, like
Right.
interpersonal moments that are fun to watch and to be with and to just enjoy your time a little bit before you go back into, oh my God, this is all horrible, these poor people.
Because the
And
darkness gets to be draining. Like
yeah,
it takes some emotional energy sometimes to watch things. And if you're always spending emotional energy on getting through dark content, but you're not receiving any emotional energy from watching happier, more uplifting content,
yeah,
then, you know, your gas tank is empty too often. Like you don't keep that balance. And I think that there is an importance to have kind of having a balance there. And that balance is different for each person.
sure. And it's different for each show, for each genre.
Right.
But with this, I feel like they try to have levity, especially in Klaus as a character, but he is so messed up that it doesn't really work as levity.
That's the
It's just
problem. He's
extra
the
sad.
most messed up of any
Yeah.
of them. And yet
Yeah.
he's the comic relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard.
And
But,
then,
you know,
yeah, it's so difficult because I
yeah.
usually like shows that get better with rewatching, and I think this one just doesn't. It's a bit sad, but it still makes it a really fun show to watch the first time around. So I would recommend it.
So I will say that I would recommend it too. I think that what stands out about it, it's very different from The Boys, as you said. And I think The Boys is probably the better show. And when I watched The Boys, I was always looking forward to the next episode. When I watched this, I was interested in the next episodes. I wouldn't say I was excited for the next episodes.
Yeah.
That being said, like, it's still a good show. It's creative. It's very clever. I think
clever.
there are a lot of clever moments in it. And I definitely, without question, think it's worth watching. It doesn't have to be the best show. There's always going to be a best show and everything else is going to be below it. But that doesn't mean you don't also watch those shows.
And I think it does what it wants to do. I think that's
it does. It's a different type of show. Like the fact that it's so different, the themes here and the style of this show, this is much more, this is closer. I don't want to say it's Tim Burton-esque, but it is a little bit Tim Burton-ish. Like it's closer to Tim Burton, whereas The Boys is closer to Michael Bay. but in a good way, like a Michael Bay-less Michael Bay.
But also with a lot of psychology and interesting stuff. So yeah, it's
yeah.
good. But I agree with the Umbrella Academy. I also think it keeps more of the sort of otherworldliness of a comic book verse.
It does. There's a little bit more fantasy style to it.
Yeah. Like I'm clearly not an expert in this, but I get that I'm watching a world that is not exactly our world, and that's why I'm okay with them not having real life consequences.
Right.
Because it, like the way of the colors and the design, it just doesn't feel exactly like our world. It feels like a comic book version of our world, and so it's fine. It works that way.
The Boys, you feel like you could step out your front door and you're already in that world.
Yeah, and if that had plot holes, it would be much worse.
Right.
So there are certain, like, it's the same.
The Umbrella Academy, it's okay. It's easier to be more forgiving of it because, as you said, it's obviously not our world. And so for the context of escapism, I think that's good too, because it is a little bit more of an escape than The Boys is. The Boys, I think what's interesting about The Boys is that it is basically our world with superheroes. The Umbrella Academy is definitely not our world. And I think that's a good thing. I think that provides a little bit of escapism, and it definitely, like I said, it's a little more Tim Burton-like. Some of the style is a little bit exaggerated. There's more of a gothic artwork design to like the mansion they live in and all that. Yeah. It's a little easier to forgive problems with the Umbrella Academy than it would be with The Boys. Now, The Boys benefits from the fact that it doesn't have a lot of problems to forgive. Yeah. Whereas with the Umbrella Academy, there are definitely some things you have to, set aside, suspend your disbelief on it. But it's still good. Like, I still think it's a good series.
Yeah. And it's also like, I almost feel like I'm too nice about it, and I was way too mean to Firefly the other time, because Firefly is so much better than
It's been a while since we recorded Firefly. I think you were a little bit mean.
You were so mad at me. But no. But
just wait until you get the email from the listeners once I finally post it today.
You never send me the emails. You protect me.
I protect you. We haven't posted the Firefly episode yet. You just wait.
We'll see. No, but I think the difference is of what scope the series or the work tries to be.
Mhm.
And does it achieve that? And I think as a reader, as a reader, as an audience, you can tell. And I think with the Umbrella Academy, it pretty much did what it wanted to do.
Yeah.
Um, but that scope wasn't really that ambitious, and that's okay. It doesn't always have to be, Game of Thrones or The Boys or whatever.
Right.
It can just be a fun, weird show with some creative element thrown
Mhm.
in to have this sort of what if moment. What
Right.
if you had these X men characters in a school together, and how would they turn out? And then it doesn't have to be crazy. I just kind of wish the focus was more on that, because that was really the interesting thing to me.
Yeah.
And then especially when they went to the second season and they completely threw that out basically and just didn't give me anything on them
Yeah.
interacting with each other, I was really disappointed.
The end of the second season was good enough, and I really have good hopes for the third season based on how the second season wrapped up. But the second season definitely felt like, okay, I'm just going to get through this so that I can
Yes.
continue watching the series.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like after half of it I was so bored and didn't want to do anything more.
The pacing in the second season was so rough. But
So,
I still
yeah.
think it's
I think the first
decent.
season is well worth watching. If you
Mhm.
like the first season, you can get through the second
Yeah.
if you want to. But the first season is pretty fun as a take on this idea, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Also,
Well,
no, let's talk about that in the Boys episode. That's
yeah, we've got a lot of stuff I want to talk about in the Boys episode. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yay.
And we're definitely going to have to break that up, I think, into a season 1 and season 2, because otherwise we're going to run long.
Yeah, we just didn't do that with this one because we would have just only said mean things in one episode if we just did one for season 2.
Yeah, if we did a season 2 episode for this one, it would have just been bad. But and this episode's a little longer because we've been on break for a while and we had some catching up to do. But we're going to try to keep these down to about 30 minutes apiece. So this one's a little longer. We're at 51 minutes.
You mean we're going to try?
We're going to try. We're going to do our best, but
we've had 90 minutes once in the past.
That's true. I mean, it all depends on how much we have to talk about. We have things to say. We got to say them. So, but I think we've said pretty much all we have to say about the Umbrella Academy. We'd recommend it, but understand not the best thing in the world. Just know what you're getting into, but it's good. It's worth checking out. So,
yeah.
All right.
It's a fun thing to watch.
So if you're watching this on YouTube right now, I'm going to have this posted later the same day that this was recorded. But we do have a couple of episodes. I think we've got episodes 6 and 7 that I've still got to go and back post from before because I'm bad. Those will be audio only. I don't know that the video turned out quite as well. But going forward, we will be doing video episodes for this. We will be posting them to the YouTube channel. If you're listening to the audio for this, go to randomchatter.com/YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, please. There's a little button there that you can click to get notifications too for when we have new episodes that get posted. It'll notify you and let you know. You can hop right in and start watching. And while you're there, be sure to check out the other videos. If you like them, hit the little thumbs up button down below. I feel like there's a lot of people watching who are like, oh my gosh, you don't have to mansplain YouTube to me. But then we also have some people who really just listen to audio stuff where, believe it or not, I kind of do have to explain this to some
also,
of them.
Every YouTuber seems to do this.
But they do it as a reminder, not to be educational. And I kind of feel like there are some people that I kind of have to, Mom, if you're listening, that I kind of, the sad thing is she probably is. I don't know. Maybe I should clean up my language a little bit. But yeah, there are some people who, we're trying to transition people from audio podcasts into video and kind of bring them up to, modern times and all that. So, so don't forget, speaking of, getting people together and bringing them up to speed on things, join our Discord server. Go to randomchatter.com/Discord. It's free. There are channels for each one of the shows on the network. So head into the Story Crucible channel. Talk about this. Talk about other series you'd like us to cover. We're going to be covering The Boys. I still want you to watch Upload.
Yeah, I still haven't done that. What we definitely have to get back into is Star Wars. I mean, we started this whole thing
so that I have to circle back to Star Wars.
Star Wars, and we've only done the first 3.
Did we not do the prequels?
Yeah, that's one.
No,
that
we didn't, because we were going to get Tim on.
Yeah.
For the Phantom Menace, because for some strange reason, Tim really likes the Phantom Menace, and I don't understand that.
I kind of like the Phantom Menace.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry. I still don't get this. We've talked about the the chronologically first
Yeah,
ones. How
yeah.
do you call those? Give me a Star
Well,
Wars term
so
for
there's
those
the
ones.
original trilogy.
The original trilogy, right? We
Okay.
watched that one.
Yeah, we
And
did
like,
that.
I'm sorry, it's okay. It's gonna be mean. No, it's good, but it has some like deep character problems there, and like some, and it just doesn't look fun. It's too 70s, and then you have the Phantom Menace, and everything looks
To be
okay at
clear, it
least.
did come out in the 70s. So the fact that it looks 70s, I mean, it's
Yeah, but I hadn't seen it before, and now we have other better technology and stuff. But no, I especially like after you told me that the
it
big problem people
hurts.
had is poor Anakin, is like, what's wrong with everybody? I'm going to defend Anakin. That's what's going to happen. Just
You're
because I
going to
want to.
defend the most evil supervillain in all of cinematic history.
Is he though? I mean, Sauron is way worse.
Sauron didn't do anything. He was a big eyeball that just needed some Visine to get the red out. Like big deal.
It's true. He didn't do that much.
No, he didn't do that much. Darth Vader like totally like chopped people in half and choked
But
them, and
like,
of
isn't
course
he
Palpatine
just?
was worse.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, even in the Star Wars universe, he isn't the worst one because he
No,
isn't
he's
the Emperor
not.
guy.
Stop correcting me. Just because you're right, it doesn't mean that you're right.
Okay, I get it.
Okay, so we will do an episode of The Phantom Menace. We'll bring Tim on to discuss it.
We'll bring Tim on.
Maybe we'll have to do that on a Saturday morning because that'll be a good time for you, and we can do it right after we do one of our Outer Rim episodes. And
but I've totally stopped the whole Star Wars watching because of this. I still need to get past the Phantom Menace because I knew the Phantom Menace from
that's
when
fine.
I was a young person, and I haven't still gone on to watch the rest, which was the whole point of this show.
Yeah, we kind of started this to get you to sucker you into watching Star Wars, didn't we?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I forgot all about that. But, you know, we still got, I want to do The Boys next, and you're already starting on The Boys.
To do that.
I really want to do Upload. I really want, like, I desperately want your opinions on that. I really love that show. I was supposed to be on Streaming Smarties with Robin and April to discuss it with them, and they invited me on. I said, great, let me know when you're recording. And then Robin...
Do you think she watched until this point?
Somebody owes me a bottle of whatever my favorite alcohol is once I pick a favorite alcohol. Not really a big drinker, but I'm going to figure something out, and you owe me a bottle, Robin.
I figured that once you said, when I figure out what my favorite alcohol is.
Yeah, well, I'm not a
cute.
big drinker. But I want your opinions on Upload. But why don't we do The Boys, and then we will set something up with Tim to do The Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
We'll do Upload. And then we can come back and do Star Wars episodes 2 and 3.
Which are entitled?
Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith.
Very good. Those ones.
And that will wrap up the prequel trilogy. Huh? You've already seen the original trilogy. Yep. And then we will have to eventually do the sequel trilogy.
See, this is the whole point of what I wanted to get through. I wanted to get to the new ones.
That makes you very different from most of our audience.
They just like the old ones?
A lot of Star Wars fans had problems with the sequel trilogy, the new ones. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. I want you to not read up any more than you already have on anything with the sequel trilogy. I want you to go into it clean without any bias other than your own, whatever personal biases you have.
And then you can roll your eyes at me forever because I like Anakin.
Okay, other people do too. I just think you're nuts. Okay. But I want you to go into the sequel trilogy with a clean slate and without any external opinions or any sort of significant awareness of any of the comments online about it. And I want your take in the context of this show and storytelling on the sequel trilogy. I kind of want a clean perspective from someone who did not grow up with Star Wars, who did not spend 30 years with like a favorite trilogy and then everything else is like apocrypha.
I know, because it's impossible. It's like, I really like Doctor Who, but I only like the, David Tennant part because that's the one I grew up with and that's the one I have nostalgia for and that's the one I love. And then when
Matt Smith is also good.
No. See, but
I'm not saying he's better than Tennant. I'm saying he's also good, Lila.
he's really hard to watch for me because I just want Tennant and nobody else is the Doctor for me. And that's the nostalgia speaking, and I understand that.
Right.
But I think with Star Wars, there's also a lot of nostalgia
Oh,
speaking.
yes.
If you see
Trust
it,
me.
like,
Yeah.
objectively as a newcomer, it's like, what?
Yeah. But that's the thing. I would really like someone's take on the sequel trilogy who did not grow up with Star Wars, who's watching all of them for the first time, and who can really come in and give an opinion. I'll call it an educated opinion on.
Thank you.
No, like you're not a film student or anything, but you write it professionally, you edit, and like you have some involvement in that, and you have a certain perspective on story elements in fiction that a lot of people don't. And I really want your take on the sequels. But for now, we're going to wrap this up. We're going to do The Boys next. We have on our short list, we have Upload and The Phantom Menace and the rest of the prequel trilogy. We'll get with Tim, and maybe we'll invite other guests on for Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Maybe we'll get... I have some ideas.
Cool. And then we'll do
and then we'll go from there. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Story Crucible. Thank you for hanging out with us. We don't have a fixed schedule yet. We're going to start doing live shows. Stay tuned for those, and we'll get some sort of a schedule. Even if it's not regular, we'll make announcements in advance and let you guys tune in as we do these lives. So that's it for now. Take care, everybody, and we will see you again in the next episode for The Boys. Take care.
Bye.